have another class coming in, and I'm just going to pass this handout with the panelists. Hi everyone, welcome to our second UMD Grows workshop. Today we're going to be focusing on community organizing and its relationship to doing food justice work. We've got an exciting panel that I'm going to introduce in a couple minutes. This is our second workshop. We received some funding through the UMass President's Office this year to revive the garden on campus with a food justice focus, looking at what it means to plant nutrient-dense foods and foods that could potentially serve students on campus, faculty, and staff that are contending with food security. And we're also going to have a perennial fruit nursery that we're going to start here that will then go into the community or into the site that we identify in the spring. So the first aspect of the project is reviving the garden on campus. The second aspect of the project is identifying at least an initial site and maybe multiple sites in food insecure areas where we can develop permaculture gardens as a way for communities to take ownership of the land and potentially address food availability. And with that, we need to look at what does it mean to community organize around this issue. And so we have panelists today that they'll be briefly talking about the work that they do, and then we're going to be asking questions and hopefully mostly be in dialogue with them this afternoon to get some ideas around what does it mean to do community engaged work on food justice in a way where the community feels a sense of ownership, where the community feels like they're actively participating in the project. And these folks have varied experience in organizing and food work. So I'm just going to briefly, or maybe I should just have you guys introduce yourselves. Sure. And then what I'll do is have you guys briefly talk about your programs.
Sure.
All right. So do you want to start with Zoe?
Sure. My name is Zoe Debello. I manage a program called Grow Education, which is doing New Bedford school gardens. Well, community gardens really located at public schools in New Bedford. I'm from Providence, Rhode Island. I've lived on the South Coast for the past 3 years, but have worked in New Bedford for about 7 now. I am a graduate student here at UMass in Educational Leadership and Policy. I think that's it. I have an adorable dog. That's about it. Adam?
My name's Adamn Davenport. I am actually from Dartmouth originally. I went to school for civil engineering a while ago up in New Hampshire, and I taught middle school science for a while and did some traveling. And now I work with Zoe with the Grow Education program, building the community gardens at the schools. I'm also starting to work with another program, the Food Security Network, with more focused on the overall New Bedford community gardens. And then also started a business with some people last year where we're doing regenerative landscape design and education, really trying to bring in, who's heard of permaculture before? I know at least one class has. You guys know the basis. So the value of our business is we're hoping to design landscapes and community parks around the values of permaculture: land care, people care, and fair share. So hoping to make a sustainable business based off of not just making money, but making money while we're improving the environment and social justice for communities. So, thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Sicky Malice. I work in New Bedford for a transit justice organization called Bus Riders United. We are a community and labor coalition that works on increasing and expanding public transportation in the area. When we got started a few years ago, there's no bus service past 6 o'clock, no bus service on Sundays, a really expensive fare system, and no Monday holiday bus service. And since we got started, we've been able to get some level of evening bus service in the area, and we helped extend the route between New Bedford and Fall River that services UMass, so now it runs on every half hour, helped restructure the fare system so it's more cost effective to travel throughout the region. And yeah, that's what I do.
And you're part of community economic development.
Oh yeah, and I work at the Community Economic Development Center, which works on a whole range of projects from small business development, immigrant assistance, organizing, neighborhood organizing, free tax preparation, a whole bunch of stuff.
And Siggy's also an alumna from UMD, from Sociology and Anthropology. I guess it was crime and justice studies also, right, when you were here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were all pretty good.
And Dave?
I'm Dave Weed. I head up an organization called Partners for a Healthier Community. We work in the greater Fall River area, specifically to improve the health of the community, the residents there. And we're involved in about 150 different kinds of projects. If you look at a website, Healthy City Fall River, you'll see lots of pictures and video. You'll be on there soon. We try to inform people in the community about all the different efforts that are going on, including things like community gardens and food justice issues. And it would take me too long to explain all 150 programs, but there's a lot and we connect with a lot of people. So I assume you folks are going to be well connected in New Bedford. I guess I'm the lone connector in Fall River, okay? So
Yeah,
nice to be here.
Yeah, you're the Fall River guy.
Okay.
Silva, I'm the Permaculture Garden Coordinator here on campus. So if you're interested in the garden, please come in and speak with me. We've had a number of weeks now where we've had students coming down and helping us with setting up the nursery beds and the garden. So we have a Facebook page. It's the UMass-Dartmouth Hunger Initiative on Facebook, and we also have a blog. Put your email down on the sign-in sheet if you're interested in getting more information about the garden project. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Grow Education. As you guys are listening to each of the groups just briefly describe what they do, please write down questions or anything you want them to further elaborate on. We're really wanting this to be more a dialogue than just hearing from them. So
you can even interrupt if you want. I mean, if you want it to be more of a dialogue, I'm down with that. So I'll just start off by saying that I am not a gardener. I am learning a lot, but I am a city person, and I always thought that limited me in what I could garden and what I could say my connection was to nature. But I'm finding out more and more through this work that really you can definitely be a gardener in the city. In fact, I think it's really exciting to be a gardener in the city. I see food as a unifier and a way to connect us, so I just want to kind of start by telling you that's kind of the premise of the work. I think Adam and I both see food and growing food collectively as a way to community organize and to bring people together and to really bring the cultural knowledge that lies within our communities to the forefront, and that's really the platform for it all. So public education, kind of hurting right now across the board in the country. Everybody agree with that? Public education. You all, yes, okay. Look alive, people. You guys look like you're gonna fall asleep. So Grow Education started doing school gardens in schools across Massachusetts. We were in all different types of schools. And about 3 years ago, we shifted the focus to just doing school gardens in the city of New Bedford at New Bedford Public Schools. So the idea was that we would create community gardens that were open to the community, that would be platforms for connecting, but on public school land, which is technically public land. We just don't really utilize it in that way. So we started doing that with 2 schools 2 years ago, and then last year 6 additional schools jumped on. This year we're taking on New Bedford High School. The goal is to create a school garden in every single public school in the city of New Bedford. So that's 25 schools by the year 2020. I don't believe there's any other school district in Massachusetts that has done that. There was a lot of kind of hesitation when we first started. Why New Bedford? You're gonna have low numbers. Are people gonna really show up? We have had nothing but extreme positive reactions. And in fact, we have no less than pretty much this amount of people in a room at any given time when we host a garden planning meeting. The premise of it is really from the ground up. We don't walk in and tell schools what to do or communities what their garden should look like. It comes from the people of the school and the people of the neighborhood telling us what they want to grow, what they want their garden to look like, and Adam over here really helps make it all happen. Because again, not the vegetable person. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process, or anywhere that I didn't?
What are some, like in the small and large cities of the United States, what would you guys say are some of the problems that we're facing? Shout them out, anything. Homelessness.
High quality foods.
Lack of high quality foods would be a problem.
Food deserts.
Price of foods.
Price of foods, affordability of foods. Anything in general too, not just surrounding food.
Quality of education.
Quality of education, for sure. Maybe even accessibility to education. Unemployment, violence, poverty in general. I was like, there's no simple, easy answer to all of this. I mean, this is the kind of work that I feel lucky to be able to be a part of, because what we're doing is trying to take one part of building gardens and communities and empowering either an immigrant population or low-income population, these city populations that don't have the resources that the majority of Americans have, maybe the majority, some could argue that, and give them opportunity to see what they have and what some would argue is a God-given right to good food, healthy food.
Hillary Clinton said that a lot last night.
Yeah. How many people watched the debate last night?
Oh, this is sad. Are you serious?
How many people? So, how many people? You guys probably are thinking about like what you're going to be doing for jobs soon enough, right? How many people are interested in pursuing something that will help people and help build maybe a healthier future for the United States and not? Is that focus? It's a good amount. That's good.
Not good. That's fine.
So there's a lot of ways to do that, and a lot of ways that we as people need to address these things, and community gardens are one outlet for that. So I just encourage you, as we talk about what we're talking about, think about what you relate to. It might not be growing food, it might not be working in gardens or building landscapes, but think about what you would want to address on these social justice issues and kind of relate it to what we're talking about, and hopefully open up the discussion along that.
And I actually didn't really care much for urban agriculture until I realized it was under that social justice umbrella, that it was a part of food security, that food and access to healthy food is a human right, and that in this country, depending on what zip code you're born into, it determines what food you have access to, which then determines your health, which then determines your lifespan. I mean, that's messed up. And in this country, out of all countries, that's just absurd. So really, once I realized that it was tied into this bigger social justice and equality issues, that's really what turned the light on for me. And it makes people come alive. I mean, it offers a human-to-human connection that I feel like in this age of technology, and which has opened so many doors for different types of connection, we're also losing that magic that happens when people get together face-to-face. And without that, it's hard to build compassion for people who are different from you. And so the more platforms we can create, whether it's a garden or something else, where you are learning and growing and maybe building something with someone that maybe has a different religious belief or looks different from you or is a different class, you can start building this compassion for people, which ultimately I think will make this world a better place.
Siggy, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I organize people. I'm also a bus rider. So I organize people like me who rely on the public transportation system in this area. And I organize community groups and labor groups to fight for what we deserve, which is a safe and reliable way to get to school, get to work, get to doctor's appointments, access food, access just going out. So what I do is I talk to people. That's my job, to go out and about on buses and in terminals and talk to the people who use the service every day and see what their problems are and what they'd like to see changed and what could be fixed. And it's a great process to be a part of as someone who also uses the service, because we get to talk to people who are experiencing the same things as you every single day. Because we live in a region where public transportation has been really crappy for a really long time, and that had a lot to do with an administration that was running the bus system that was embezzling federal funds from the taxpayers to enrich his life. I don't know how the better way to say that. So he was stealing from the people, and nothing changed for like 17 years in this area when it came to public transportation, and that really harmed this area a lot economically. Because when you don't have access to public transportation and you're dependent on public transportation, that limits your access to steady employment. It limits your access to getting to grocery stores, or getting to a farmer's market, or getting to just a pharmacy and getting, you know, what you need for your everyday life, let alone wanting to go out and do things and, you know, live your life as normal as possible without a car in an area that isn't a major urban center, that has, you know, bus service till 2 in the morning or whatever. So what we do is we organize ourselves to go up against the decision-making bodies to get what we want. And what we want right now is just basic levels of service. Like I said before, there's not bus service past 6 o'clock on all the bus routes in the area, which, you know, if you're working a job and you need to get there back and forth, if you can't either get there or get home from the job, you're going to have a hard time keeping that job, which then, you know, you're going to have a hard time saving money if what you want to do is buy a car, or, you know, it's really difficult to, if you don't have reliable transportation for social mobility. It's a hard thing. So what we're trying to do is improve the public transportation system in the area so people can improve their lives, so can improve regional commerce throughout the area, so people can travel in between the cities and live their lives. Does anyone in this room, have you ever ridden a CERTA bus? Yeah, do any of you rely on using that bus to get to places off campus? No. Now, why is that? How many people have cars in this room? All right. But for those who don't, would you use the service more if it was better? Yeah, you would? Yeah, because you know, it's cheap, it's affordable when you're in college. I mean, I didn't have a lot of money in college. I'm sure you guys don't either. It was really an affordable way to get around, and organizing people to be able to fight for things that they need and want in their lives is really empowering, because it builds community, and it builds people taking control over something in their lives and being able to actually make a change with it. And we also get community organizations involved that kind of have a hand in the, you know, the system too. And the workers who actually work on the buses, they want to see the service improve too. So we work with a wide range of people to be able to make changes, and it's great, yeah.
And then Dave, from...
Well, there are a lot of things that we need, and a lot of things that impinge on social justice in this community. Unfortunately, you missed an opportunity in last night's debate, since you weren't watching it, to understand a little bit about inequity in the culture we live in. We are in one of the most inequitable societies in the world, okay? The difference between people who don't earn a lot of money and have few resources versus people who have a great deal of resources is expanding, okay? And one of the reasons that all of us up here are working is to collapse that so that people who traditionally have fewer access to resources gain more, and so that people who have many resources find good opportunities to share those resources and distribute them. This is what you're working on in social justice. Am I wrong?
You're right.
Okay.
You're absolutely right.
Okay. A just society does not have extremes in that sense. And as you pointed out earlier, those extremes lead to some outcomes, and the one I'm most concerned about are health outcomes. That people who have the least resources are also the group of people who are unhealthy. to the extent that in the past 20 years, we have improved health of people in the upper income ranges. They're now living 11 months longer. It's one easy way to quantify that. But people in the lower part of society are living 2 months less long than they did 10 and 20 years ago. Things are getting worse for that group while they get better for the other group. Okay? Some of the things that you talk about in terms of transportation and gardens actually address health issues. Keeping healthy requires a lot of resources. Being able to get somewhere for health care is one of those resources, and buses don't often fill the bill right now. They need to do better. Gardens are a way of people not only becoming better socially connected, which is an important aspect of health, but they also provide access to nutrient-rich foods. You're going to a farm next week? Or
Next Wednesday,
Next Wednesday. Pay attention there, because what is grown in that farm is delivered to people in low-income sectors of the community. And it's a way of trying to right that balance. The balance you find when you go into a grocery store and you look at healthier food items and find that they're more expensive than the low-cost food items, which, though they're subsidized through wheat and corn subsidies and things of that sort, at least the farmers are subsidized, not the people. We end up with stores full of products made with refined grains and sugars. Okay, that's most of the products in the middle of the store. We know that those contribute to two major problems in health in this community and around the world actually now. One is rising rates of obesity and overweight, okay, which is continuing to go up as it has over the last 30 years, as we make those cheap foods more available, and in particular to people in the lower income ranges of society. Those are the folks who are suffering the most from the lack of availability of nutrient-rich foods, who are eating foods that none of us should be eating, but because they're inexpensive, people are eating them. All right. And the second is diabetes. Anybody have an idea what the rate of diabetes is right now? It was 10%. Just a new report just came out, 14%. Oh, we're getting better at creating diabetes. Okay, it's gone up. And now, have you heard about pre-diabetes? Pre-diabetes means that you're on the way to developing diabetes, which might not show up till your 40s or 50s or 60s. But pre-diabetes now affects 38% of the population. Add 14 and 38, what do you get? Math majors? 52% of the population now is either diabetic diagnosed or pre-diabetic diagnosed. Okay? That's over half the population. Largely because what have we made available for food? Do you grow wheat or corn in large quantities?
No.
Are grains the...
No, but boy, do people want corn.
Well, they do.
Everyone asks for corn. Can we grow corn?
Right.
Yeah, of course.
And if
We're
that
like,
was
wow.
the only source of carbohydrates, we'd probably do fine. The trouble is when you mill that corn, dry it, process it, add sugar, salt, etc., and sell it as a product, it's not so good for you. And especially if that's not the only thing you're eating. But if you're eating tomatoes and beans and all kinds of other foods, you're going to get the nutrient density that you need that corn really doesn't do very well at providing. So that's a lot of what we work on, is trying to improve the health of the community by improving access to healthy foods. Okay? And on the other side of it, we look at improving activity, not necessarily going to the gym kind of activity, but in particular the kind of activity that gets someone from one place to another. And something that nearly everybody in this room is equipped to do, and that's to walk or use a wheelchair. And we are in the process now of addressing access issues, literally sidewalk access issues in the city of Fall River, so that people can walk to a store where they can get healthier foods, or to one of our 4 farmers markets that we run every summer in the city. So those are many of the issues there that you can become involved in, and I think that's part of what you plan to do. So I'd be curious to hear more about your interest in working on some of these things.
And why, I mean, does anybody have a guess at why so many people like these sort of foods? Anything that comes in a bag has like 15 ingredients and isn't a natural food? Do you have any thoughts? So there are chemists paying loads. Oh, where is it?
There's a thought.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, probably some chemists to make it, like, addicting, to, like, so that you crave it, and that, I don't know, to make it taste better. And
Absolutely.
As a craving, like, nicotine type thing.
It's addicting. Like there are chemists being paid loads of money for the past 25, 30 years, figuring out what our taste buds resonate with, how that connects to our brain, and how it satisfies our physical bodies. So they're in a laboratory figuring out what chemical mixtures they can put in food to get us addicted to the shitty foods that we're buying. For anybody have a guess at why?
It's kind of like the perfect bliss moment, I think they call it. Like the bliss moment is when the food tastes so perfect. It's like,
Kind of like taking crack. Yeah. There's actually, I mean, there's reports in documentaries and stuff saying
Adam
that,
likes to do that.
sugar is as addicting, if more addicting than crack and cocaine. It's crazy.
I always heard that's why crackers have the word crack in it, like any type of like ready like chip like crackers type thing, because they're as addicting as crack.
And it all comes back, it all comes down to the kind of inequality gap that he talked about. It's about making as much profit off of the people who don't have a lot into these corporations that are set up to make as much money for their few shareholders as possible. So it's kind of, I mean, you can start to see patterns as we talk about different things of just people, the majority of people getting screwed.
And then society likes to blame those who are poor for that they are just unhealthy, that they are making poor choices. And, you know, that's why they're poor in the first place, and, like, you know, your health problems are your problems, and there's not a big setup happening. It's actually, there's a lot of blame and shame around not being healthy and being of low income, and a lot of stigma around food stamps and around SNAP benefits and all that stuff. So I think what's important in, like, the work that we do and talking to teachers and just people in general, a lot of the families that I'm seeing actually just want to cook the food that they cooked in the countries they came from, which was actually really healthy food. It was real food and it was healthy, and it's not about, like, yes, the nutrient density matters and all that, but really it's just about quality food and real food. And that's the argument. I mean, if you're eating quality and good food, you are probably getting your nutritional needs met. It's the fact that everything has been kind of taken over, and, you know, Monsanto has put their grips on owning everything, owning a seed. Seeds, how many corn variations were there like 50 years ago? Like over, I don't know, there are thousands and thousands, and today there's like 20 something. I mean, like the variation in like the different types of seeds that could adapt to different climate change stuff, or climate changing, has like gone so narrow. Anyways, I could go on and on about Monsanto, but my point is, it's just about healthy quality food. You don't have to go crazy off the deep end. The chemistry is really awesome too, but for me, it's real food. That's what people are asking for. And, like, I don't think that's. I don't think that's nuts.
Let me just interject here too. There's another set of corporations that are designed to take care of the problems that poor food creates.
Companies.
Yes, we can't forget them because they're major influences in the stock market. And if you want to make money, invest in a pharmaceutical company.
True story.
So, to bring it back, so now we've heard at least a little bit from each of you guys in terms of your programs. The reason why we've invited these groups here today is to get some insight and advice and hear from folks in the community that are already doing organizing, how we might approach this project. Particularly, I mean, we're right at the point where we're about to identify a community site. There were a group of students, and some of us went to the Food Security Network meeting last week, and there are some sites in New Bedford, including a grow education site that we might partner with, as well as some community gardens that have been abandoned, and we've also been talking to folks in Fall River about identifying a site. But as I've been saying all along, it's much easier to say we're going to work in the community than to actually do it. And a primary reason why we invited you guys is to really hear about what the process is to start a project. So here we are about to identify a site and work with the community, and we want to do it with cultural sensitivity. We want to do it in a way where the community feels ownership. So I guess I want to ask you, how did you guys get started on each of your projects in Fall River, with Grow Education, as well as with transportation? And it's great to have Siggy here, because I think oftentimes, you know, when you're doing food work, you're only thinking about food. And when it comes to doing social justice work, we have to think about transportation, we have to think about education, we have to think about employment, resources, other factors, and how they relate to food in order for the project, the initiative, to be successful. So it'd be great to hear from you too, and just your community organizing experience. So maybe you guys could just each briefly talk a little bit about how you got started. And you guys feel free to interject with questions. And I have some questions here, but I'd love for you guys to be thinking of questions as well, because it's pretty great to have these guys here to talk with and learn from.
Sure. So how did I start? I think it just came pretty naturally. I think I like people, so we went to schools, and also just understanding that we wanted everyone to have a voice at the table. So put out press releases, did flyers, had community meetings, had shared, you know, if people was like, just little things, like if there's a podium style, like we switch it up and have everyone be in a circle, just basic kind of community organizing techniques to make everyone feel that they are equally a part of the conversation. Understand that everyone's coming from a different place, and you're meeting them where they are. So not having meetings, say like at the Marion Institute office, which is 10 minutes away from New Bedford and Marion, where like my office used to be. Not asking people to come there, but rather to go to New Bedford and go to where they're working. When I work with teachers, I always go to the school to meet. Their lives are hectic, and their lives are crazy, and it also gives you or me, whoever is doing organizing, a window inside of the community in which you're trying to organize. I think also not separating so much, understanding that like I'm pretty aware that I'm white, and I'm pretty aware that I'm not from New Bedford. So understanding your place as the organizer and really owning that, but also connecting and realizing that you're part of, there are communities that you are collectively a part of, like you're all human and you're all in this room together right now, and there are places of commonality that you can come together, but also recognizing that there are differences and that you're not just trying to jump and be like, I'm one of the crew, like I'm in. There are differences, and owning those, I think, has really helped in creating meaningful and authentic relationships with the people who I work with. So
in terms of just like the first few schools that you organized with, was it contacting the principals? I mean, how did you get these schools on board?
It was teachers. It was teachers that led me to principals. And it's really, I think I identified people who already had the trust of the people who I was trying to organize. So that trust for me, I have some of it now, but that took years to kind of build. And so when I was first organizing, and I've never really called myself an organizer, that's kind of funny. But when I was first organizing and developing these meetings, it was really finding out who had the pulse on the parents. Like, what was that teacher who stood outside and gave every parent a hug? That's the person you want to get to know. When New Bedford Global Learning Charter School was asking me, like, okay, we want to get the community involved in these garden beds, but we don't really know how, I said, you need to talk to Corinne Williams at the CEDC, because she has the trust of the community. You need to find these people that already have it, and they're your gatekeepers. And then one day you might become a gatekeeper, but that takes time. So that's how I kind of, and also the institutional setup too. So there's schools, but schools aren't necessarily a trusted identity. A lot of parents have had bad experiences growing up with their education, and so there's a wall blocking them. So you have to kind of, find those different gatekeepers and plug in.
I've found a really important part to create an environment. It's kind of like, you can bring it back to like nature versus nurture as a community, as people. I think most people these days would agree it's both. It's a little bit of both. We all have genetics, we all have, but we're all a product of where we're raised. So it's looking at these communities that we're working in and looking at what they want. Shutting off what I think the world could use to make it a better place, and really listening and asking good questions and creating a space for them to think about things that they never really have thought about before. Like, would I really like a garden or a nice park or a beautiful place to go sit in with birds and bees and butterflies for my kids to play around with, like a natural place with some nice healthy grass for my kids to run around in, not just a concrete, a concrete pad with a playground on it. So it's creating a space for whatever community you're talking to realize what they're allowed to think about and dream about and want, and then asking good questions and really listening to get their input and really bring it out of them rather than continually pushing. So that's 1/3 of it, I would say. The other third of it is looking at the actual design of the landscape you're working with, the ecosystem, call it. You have to look at what resources are there, what resources could be there, and what resources you have around you. She was talking about finding the right people in the right places to get things done, because when you get into a city and a community, you get into a school, into a classroom, there's certain people that just know where to go and get things done a lot faster than trying to chase your tail around in circles. So listening to the community, kind of the goals of the community, what they want, looking at your ecosystem, the resources you're working with, and then also your education, your knowledge, your intelligence, and really connecting the three of those to create something that will be sustainable into the future, usable, and will actually benefit the community that you're building it in. I mean, I look at like the way that we're kind of taught in our foreign policy, maybe as a country, it's usually going in and putting what we think needs to happen, what we think will fix the problems. But really, it's first starting with that first thing of figuring out what the community actually wants, what their skills are, and what they're searching for.
So Adam and Zoe touched on a lot of what it means to organize, and something I just want to say is, if you want to organize something, you want to organize around an issue, just do it. That's the first thing that you have to do, just do it. If it's one person, if it's 2 people, if it's 20 people, just do it. There aren't enough people out there fighting for what they want and what they want to see happen in their community, whether it be a garden, whether it be for transportation, whether it be for police brutality, whatever keeps you up at night and whatever hurts you, whatever upsets you, whatever you want to be changed, you can change it. That's the thing. Every single person in this room has the ability to change something if they want to. You just have to do it. That's all. You just have to do it. And the way that, so I actually started organizing when I was a student, and I did a summer internship with the Labor Education Center here, and my job was to go ride the buses, talk to people, see what their issues were, and that was kind of the first step. So that's kind of a basics of organizing. First, you got to figure out what you want to organize around. In our situation, it was bus service, not having enough bus service. And then you got to figure out who your people are. Who's on board with you? Who's on your side? And for us, that was the Coalition for Social Justice. That was the Labor Education Center. That was UMass-Dartmouth. That was the Amalgamated Transit Union, the Hands Across the River Coalition in New Bedford. And those were the people who were like, yeah, I think you're right. We need to do something about this. And the way that we can make it happen is if we all get together. We all get together and pull our resources from the inside information that we have as bus drivers, the information that we have as community leaders, and the political clout that we have to get access to mayors and advisory boards and all those bureaucratic systems that we have to weave through to get things done. And that's when things actually started to happen, is when all these pieces came together of riders, groups, unions, people who supported what we wanted, getting a mayor on board saying, yeah, you're right, the people in my city can't get to work. The people in my city can't get to a grocery store on a Saturday, or can't go to church on Sunday. There's no service for an entire day out of the week in my cities. My businesses are suffering. And when you have all those people at the table, it works and it makes things happen. Bus riders in this area are different from major urban centers like New York, like Boston, like Chicago, because people out here, we're not riders by choice a lot of the time. And you're talking earlier about how it's good for the environment, and which it is, reducing your carbon footprint and stopping our dependency on fossil fuels. But that's not a reality out here yet. It's people out here ride out of necessity. It's because they can't afford any other way to get around, so they have to ride a shitty bus service. And most of the people that I work with, we're students, we're low income, we're immigrants, we're minorities, we're all people who are left out of kind of the mainstream economy. So that has a lot to do with like I said before, having access to social mobility and being able to get that job in the field that you actually went to school for, or being able to go visit relatives, or whatever you use a car for, whatever you need to go walk to, bike to, you want to be able to ride a bus to too. And so that's kind of how it got started, is by having all these groups come together and realizing that something did need to get changed, and the only way that it was going to change is if we all came together and worked on it, like what they mentioned before, knowing who's with you and how to weave through these networks.
You do a great job talking about organizing, and it's nice to think that it always goes well, but let me talk a little bit about when it doesn't go well. Okay, I started organizing right out of college when I was in Vista out in Seattle, working in a housing project there, and we were first told do something about people's health care there, so we organized a clinic, and then the next assignment was do something about education. And we thought we would just get all the kids who dropped out of school back into school again. Wrong. Didn't go that way. What we found out were all the reasons why they didn't want to be in school, and why the school, let me set the scene for you. This is in West Seattle, one of the whitest parts of Seattle, and the housing project was 70% African American. You can figure what was going on there, why the kids didn't want to be in school, okay? We ended up starting our own school. We didn't think we were going to do that. That school is open today, okay? That process took many more months than we ever thought, and we had to fight battles with the school department and everyone else. If you expect that social change comes easy, think again. Okay, there are enormous obstacles. Getting any one thing to change is very difficult. But if you stick to the premise that, number one, it's not what you want, it's what the people you're working on behalf of want, then you're on the right track. I think one of the most important things to understand is that food justice may not be the top priority for a lot of people who are struggling with so many other issues. Economic, crime, child care, etc. Just getting to the table is enough of a challenge, okay? So the first thing to do is to find out what are people's first priorities and which one of those can you really be helpful with. And I think you're going to have a chance in your class to look at that. I don't want to keep talking. I want to start listening, because I think there's a lot of expertise in this room, and I hope we have time to hear from people here.
What are some connections that you can make from the panelists in terms of either how we might, just continue thinking about what it means to work with a community, or what are some questions? I don't know if we should have them talk amongst themselves a little bit. Why don't you take 5 minutes and huddle into a group of 2 to 3 people and think about what are some connections. What are you hearing here that might be relevant as we think about moving this project forward? You guys have just handed in your proposals for your research projects. I know some of you guys are interested in the public health aspect of this. Some of you guys are interested more on the sustainability side. Some of you are interested in permaculture and what it means to develop a garden in a low-income neighborhood. So maybe you can make some connections between your topics and what the panelists have said, and then we're going to have you guys report back so we can make this a little bit more of a dialogue.
Working with the schools and the students in the schools, like, are you supplying food to the schools? Are you trying to get the students to get involved in the thing? Are you just using the schools?
But if any of you would like to participate in, we're doing a community garden at New Bedford High School this year, which is a huge deal. Normally gardens are just done at like elementary schools. They're a cutesy little thing, and thus far that's what we've been doing. Is not that our gardens are cutesy, but we're substantial gardens at elementary schools. But we're going to be having a community meeting at New Bedford High School to discuss the garden. So if any of you wanted to be a part of that process, that's going to be on November 12th, which is a Thursday night. But Rachel has my information, and I will send the flyer over to you if you want to just pass it out. But I'd love to have any one of you join us. Hey, Dana.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I think I first got knowledge about food insecurity and issues from my dad. My dad actually started the Black Panther Party in New Bedford. One of the things that the party did was feed people. They had a breakfast program because at that time schools didn't feed people. So if you didn't get breakfast at home, you went to school hungry. My father grew up very poor, so he went to school hungry often and couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. You know, was that kid that the teachers knew about before he ever came into the classroom as being like a rabble-rouser, and was always in trouble at school. And part of that was because he was hungry. Also, kids used to, at that time, they didn't give lunch either, so kids would walk home and have lunch at home. So if you didn't have food at home, you just didn't eat. So one of the things the Panther Party did was they did a breakfast program, and they also gave away groceries. So I think a few years after the party started, J. Edgar Hoover, who was head of the FBI, started counterintelligence projects, what we call COINTELPRO. The object of that was to destroy the party, killing or imprisoning the leadership and arresting them so that it drained resources, so that it took away from the breakfast program and the food programs. And he did that because specifically of the breakfast program. He said that they were infiltrating neighborhoods and turning people against the government. You can't really infiltrate your own neighborhood, but it just goes to show you how powerful it is when you feed someone. And my father was actually a person that was a victim of COINTELPRO. He'd been arrested 77 times before his final arrest for a murder. He did 13 years in jail for murder he didn't commit. It's actually my uncle that killed the guy, and when he admitted to it, they actually kept them both. So for me, food security is feeding people. It's a very revolutionary act. I'm Cape Verdean. The person that freed Cape Verde, Emil Cabral, he was an agronomist, and actually our flag was one of the only flags that actually had food on it. And he writes a lot about the power of feeding people and the power of keeping people hungry. So when I first came aboard as city council, there was a Serenity Gardens. It was like this little park in the South Bend. It used to be a factory, the Morse cutting tool factory. And the land is compromised, so they grow in boxes above the land. And there were people hanging out there, these old guys, old timers drinking. You know, someone actually died there. I'm not sure if they were drunk and they fell asleep and froze to death. We never figured out like if they OD'd, what it was. But there was an activist who had his office across the street who wanted to close it. And I went, knocked on the doors of people that lived there, talked to the women that ran it, and they wanted it open. They just didn't have resources. So I told him I wasn't going to work to close it. So he found another counselor that, you know, didn't knock on doors and find out what people wanted. He just put in a motion for no trespassing. And what that does is it sort of gives the police power to kick people out of there. But the mayor was like, we're not doing that, you know, just work on the garden. So I reached out to Dan King, who's a farmer, and he does a lot of work with the Y here.
We're going next week.
Oh, cool. Dan is awesome. He's great and very serious guy. And he and a man named John Aruda came and they looked and they sort of said, okay, consulted with us, what you can do to farm better. John actually got us tons of resources, people that came and rebuilt the boxes and gave us all this like dirt. And I've never farmed or touched gardened in my life. It's not my thing. I like to feed people, but I can't do that. It's just not, you know, everyone has their thing. But so he brought everything that they needed and, you know, taught them vertical gardening because there's only so much space. And we were actually able to donate between 800 and 900 pounds of organic vegetables to seniors in Ward 4. 30% of the seniors in my city suffer from malnutrition. So they eat one meal or less a day, or everything that they eat all day doesn't equate to a good, nutritious meal. But when you're a senior and that happens, it affects your bones. It affects, we have a high rate of people return visiting to the hospital because they're sick, because they're not feeding themselves properly. It actually leads to obesity, which I did not know. There was so much that I learned. So the giveaway with the food was a great thing. Moving forward, I'd like to get them a greenhouse so that they can grow year-round and donate year-round. Christmas, those holidays, that's when people really suffer because the grandparents are going to get their grandkids gifts. So if that means that they don't eat, they're going to do that. And we grow like, you know, there's a lot of Cape Verdeans, Portuguese, so we grow a lot of kale. It's very healthy and people eat kale soup, beans, squash, tomatoes they grew, strawberries. It was really cool. Right now, we were able to put a fence around it. There's no lock, people can go in and out, but we just had like the strawberries. Someone came and took them all. And I bought all these baskets because there's a little daycare. So I was going to give them to the kids and have them come and pick their own strawberries. And then I had to go and tell them we can't do it. You ever try and tell little kids if you promise them something, it's not happening? It was like the worst day of my life. So I was like, we need a fence. Moving forward, I'd like to, I reached out to the police department. They said they'll donate some shrubs. So I want to get actually the really tall sunflower trees because they actually, I learned, detoxify the land and also provide like a little privacy in there, and a butterfly bush. I'd like to release some butterflies. When I was a kid in New Bedford, there were butterflies everywhere. Now there's like none. I want to get some books and pillows. We have a lot of single mothers, so when they garden, their kids can lie on the pillows and read, and it'll be private. I've spoken to the band leader at the high school. Complex compositions are really good for kids' brains. It's like going to the gym for their brain. And actually the Beatles have like a lot of that in their music. So I talked to them about coming and having them practice their violins and stuff while the kids are there so they can like be stimulated. So I have big dreams for this little garden. Awesome. We don't, you know, people are like, well, we need to turn this into a community center. And I'm like, well, that's going to cost millions and millions because we have to clean up the land and we don't have that money. So you have to be, I mean, growing up poor, I know how to make a lot of stuff out of nothing. And that's kind of what we have to do with this and be creative and have our own little place, you know? So moving forward, that's what I'd like to do right now, starting with the greenhouse so we can grow and feed people year round.
Thank you. Dana was saying how just as a result of the Reagan era, that there's increasing, staggering disparity in New Bedford, and some people have a vision of New Bedford as gentrifying it and kind of whitening it, and her vision is more this idea of those who are in low income positions, how can we support those communities and really being able to reclaim New Bedford and have the skills and reap the benefits of, you know, rebuilding the city, which is like just a nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by the way that you're able to bring different constituencies and different people together to complete the projects, because it's not an easy task, and you're going like across political lines, you're going across like race lines, you're trying to make this be something that is systematic throughout, that can really bring people together. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you everyone. Thank